Hello, everyone. My name is Charles Snyder. Today is Thursday, April 14th, 6 p.m. on the East Coast, 3 p.m. on the West Coast. And on behalf of the Roundtable, welcome to this National Arts Club program, Behind the Boom, NFTs and the Arts Community. The National Arts Club is a 501c3 based in New York. Our mission is to stimulate, foster, and promote public interest in the arts and to educate the American people in the fine arts. How do we do that? Well, each year we host more than 150 events that are free and open to the public. Musical performances, theatrical performances, film screenings, literary readings, art exhibitions, and special programs like tonight. Now our guests for NFTs and the art community. John Delaney is a partner at Perkins Coie LLP. He is on the East Coast. He specializes in technology, transactions, and privacy practice. John has advised clients ranging from startups to Fortune 500 companies on licensing, intellectual property, technology-related matters. John's experience includes negotiating complex IT and business contracts, service-level agreements, content agreements, and licenses and similar transactions. John routinely advises clients on matters about social media, mobile apps, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, big data, blockchain, and other emerging technologies. Our other guest, Sarah Stillman, is a partner with Perkins Coie on the West Coast, based in Palo Alto. Sarah advises innovators in fintech and blockchain industries. Her clients range from entrepreneurs and startups to big tech and regulated financial institutions. Sarah is experienced in both the financial services, regulatory issues, and transactional matters, and that allows her to counsel on a variety of regulatory, commercial, compliance, and product development projects, including non-fungible tokens, NFTs. Sarah provides actionable regulatory assessments that drive product development, marketing, and regulatory licensing strategies. There will be a question and answer session at the end of our guest presentation. So please use the Q&A tool to add your question for consideration. And now, John, Sarah, on behalf of the National Arts Club, we thank you in advance for today's program, and we welcome you.
Great. Thank you, Charles, for that introduction. Sarah and I are honored to be presenting to the NAC and its members. It's a real thrill. Before I turn it over to Sarah, I thought I would just set the table very quickly. We're going to try to accomplish three things. First, we want to demystify NFTs. There's a lot of confusion and so what is an NFT? How does it work? So Sarah's going to be providing us kind of a looking under the hood of how NFTs work, and you'll actually see Sarah minting an NFT as part of this presentation and showing you just how easy it is. Second, we're going to highlight some use cases and some of the developments relating to NFTs in the arts community, which I think will be of particular interest to the NAC members. And then finally, Sarah and I, as Charles mentioned, are attorneys. We're going to touch on some of the really some of the complex legal issues raised by NFTs. We're going to keep it at a high level, but our goal is to give you a sense of some of the complicated, nuanced legal issues that are raised when you mint and sell NFTs. And so with that, Sarah, I turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks very much, John. And thanks very much for having us today. This is a topic that we're excited to share with you. So leading in with where John indicated we're starting, which is kind of demystifying what is an NFT. To to get to that point, I think it's helpful to first look at how a blockchain works. What's a blockchain and why does it matter? And to do that, we go back to the beginning where it all started with Bitcoin. And Bitcoin was a blockchain that was very much designed for financial transactions. The original Bitcoin white paper was titled something along the lines of a peer-to-peer electronic cash. And the way the Bitcoin blockchain would work, as kind of depicted in this slide here, is that in a scenario where A wants to send money to B, you could imagine this is something like a shared Google spreadsheet or something of that nature. A wants to send money to B. And so A says, all right, I've got X amount in column A and I'm going to send money. That transaction is then grouped together with a bunch of other transactions. And that bunch of transactions is represented in what's called a block. The block is then broadcast to everyone else in the network, every other node in the network that is effectively making sure that A wanting to send money to B, A actually has money to start with to be able to send to B. And then those blocks in the network, those nodes in the network will confirm that the transaction is valid. What then happens is that block, that group of transactions gets added to the blockchain. That's why it's called a blockchain. And so the starting point for reviewing the next block of transactions only needs to go back to the prior block in order to assert, yes, this is all validated, this is all confirmed, that this is a valid transaction. And so the notion of this is that it solved the double spend problem of if A wants to send money to B, making sure all of those nodes on the network that are sitting there authenticating and making sure that A actually has money to send to B is what is novel about using something like this technology instead of something that is just more like a shared spreadsheet where one person can go in and actually edit the balance and no one might notice. One other quick note is that the parties in the network that are responsible for the validating, at least on the Bitcoin network and many other blockchain networks, their reward for performing the functions to make sure that the transactions are valid is to get more Bitcoin. And so if you've heard of Bitcoin mining, that's effectively what happens is the parties that are involved in validating the transactions are rewarded by getting new Bitcoin. But there are a lot of uses for blockchain beyond just financial transactions. So if we can go to the next slide, please. The core characteristics of a blockchain, abstracting a little bit away from Bitcoin specifically, are that there's a distributed group of connected computers that programmatically reach agreement with respect to the status of or changes to certain shared data. And again, with the Bitcoin network, it's largely focused on financial transactions and something like a distributed ledger. You've probably heard that term before, distributed ledger technology to talk about a blockchain. That's very much having something like a shared spreadsheet in mind. But there are lots of uses for blockchain beyond just financial transactions, and probably the most popular of which is called the Ethereum network. And where Bitcoin was very focused on financial transactions, the Ethereum network was focused on distributed computing. And so similarly to how we might have, we might use something like, Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel for financial transactions, we'll use things like PowerPoint or Microsoft Word for different types of for different types of computing. And changing the data sometimes means that using a different blockchain is a more efficient way to keep track and record of that data. So with that, if we can go to the next slide, it leads us to what are NFTs? What's an NFT? And what NFTs are at the kind of very basic level is they are non-fungible tokens. So we talked a little bit, I mentioned the Ethereum network where ETH is the native currency, or the Bitcoin network where there are Bitcoin tokens. All of those are fungible tokens. And one Bitcoin is the same as any other Bitcoin. The idea behind an NFT is that it represents a unique, specific type of value, and it's not fungible with any other asset that can be tracked on a particular blockchain network. Ethereum has been the network that is most popular to date for NFTs. And so we don't need to go into the weeds about this here, but if you see references to something like ERC 721 or ERC 1155, these are references to smart contract templates that effectively are designed in order to support NFTs as opposed to fungible tokens. Next slide. And so that's kind of the technical, what is an NFT? How does it work on a blockchain? But there's also the practical question of what are NFTs? One of the very first use cases for NFTs or popular iterations of NFTs was a game called Cryptokitties. And it was launched, I want to say, in late 2017. And the idea was that you would get these little digital representations of cats, and they all had different features. They had, some had fluffy tails, some had thin tails. They had different color eyes and ears and different marks and spots and colors. And they all had these unique different features. And you could breed the cats together as part of a smart contract on the Ethereum network. And as a result, you would get another cat. And so it's sort of taking the notion of trading baseball cards or Pokemon cards or something like that, but it was interactive in a way that the program itself would also then create new NFTs as a result of interacting with the platform and kind of playing the game. So that being kind of the first iteration that had a lot of popularity, we then saw a number of video game platforms start thinking about, well, how can we use NFTs in a video game? Can I buy a car that's an NFT, but then based on gameplay, it can be improved upon in some way? And then can I sell that car for someone else to use within the game? It's also been used to represent artwork or music. And I think that's art especially is going to be relevant to a number of the things we're going to look at later. But it brings up all kinds of interesting questions of, if you have artwork that you are reflecting on in the form of an NFT, and then you sell that NFT, are you actually selling the ownership, or are you just selling a licensing right to that artwork? And so one of the kind of important things to think about or to notice when you're either buying an NFT or thinking about making an NFT or selling an NFT is that a lot of the creative images or music or media that might be associated with an NFT is not actually stored on the blockchain. Instead, it's stored offline on whether AWS or Azure or some other platform. And instead, what the NFT is meant to represent is a licensing right to whatever that underlying asset is. And so particularly if you're thinking about NFTs and art, it's important to keep in mind, when you're designing or buying any kind of NFT, are you actually buying an ownership right to whatever the underlying asset is, or are you buying some kind of licensing right to it? And then the next slide. So why do people buy NFTs? Why do we care? Well, each NFT is unique. NFTs are collectible and tradable. And in many ways, what NFTs do is they bring to the internet the sort of notion of a signed or autographed copy of a CD or of an image or of a print or of any kind of any piece of creation that you might have in the digital world. A number of us grew up in a universe where kind of getting the limited edition collectible or the signed copy of a thing there was something to that, and it had some kind of additional value as a result of being that kind of limited edition. And what NFTs do is they bring that notion of there's only one version or there's limited versions, this is a limited edition or a signed copy, and they bring that to the digital age in a way that you can actually track and prove. Because of the distributed ledger technology, because of the blockchain that's being used underneath, you can actually prove this is whatever I have the right to with respect to this NFT that I hold is the item that was actually digitally signed by the artist or issued on a limited edition. And so I think that's one of the biggest features as to why people buy NFTs. I think another reason people buy NFTs is kind of on the creator side. On the flip side, it's actually not that hard to create NFTs. And so because of that ease of creating NFTs, it also generates a new engagement opportunity for artists and creators who want to interact with folks, with their fans or folks they might otherwise engage with in a digital fashion. And if we go to the next slide, if you doubt me that it's easy to make NFTs, we're going to run through the process right here. The video that we're about to switch to goes a little bit quickly, so I'm going to give an overview before we get there. But the first step is that we're going to create an Ethereum wallet. As I mentioned, Ethereum is kind of the most popular blockchain to date for purposes of creating NFTs. And then we'll fund the Ethereum wallet, create our NFT, and list it for sale. So without further ado, let's mint an NFT. So there's a number of Ethereum wallets out there. I like to use MetaMask because it has pretty good functionality both on mobile and web. And so you'll see, this is not an endorsement, but this is why I'm using MetaMask here. This is one of those wallets where if you lose your private keys, you lose access forever. So I highly recommend that if you're going to play around with some of these features, you use a strong password manager. I have one password here, but there are a lot of good options. So then the next step is to fund the Ethereum wallet. And we'll get to this later in the video as to why this is important, but it's effectively a way to ensure you use the funds in the wallet when you go to post for sale to ensure that you're not actually spamming the network. So there's different ways that you can fund it. MetaMask has some options where you can buy directly from within the MetaMask app. I had funds in another account already over at Coinbase. And so here you see I'm copying my address for my new ETH wallet. I'm going over to Coinbase and I'm sending the ETH to my new MetaMask wallet. And then it shows up in the wallet. There we go. And so from there, the next step is to actually create the NFT. And if any of you are familiar with posting pictures on platforms like Facebook or Instagram, it's a pretty similar process. I'm skipping over the part where I created an account at OpenSea, but I'm going to go to OpenSea where I have an account and use that as the platform for creating my NFT. Here you can see it's a pretty familiar browse, drag and drop, and add the NFT to the listing. There's a number of features you can include, kind of going back to the notion of collectible cards or things of that nature. There are ways that you can set kind of groups and characteristics and features. I'm keeping a pretty high level here. We've got this little graphic that an NFT coin in space, and so I'm going to call it Nifty Space. But you can see there's a bunch of additional features you can add and tags that you can put. Some platforms will combine and condense the portion of creating the NFT and listing it for sale. OpenSea has it separate. And this is where we'll go through and I can set a price for my NFT. If you want to go buy the NFT, it's available on OpenSea. You can put all sorts of bidding and price parameters if you want it to be an auction, all sorts of different things. And then the posting of the listing here is, I mentioned earlier, we fund the ETH wallet and push a transaction out to ensure that we're not spamming the network, that it is in fact a valid NFT that I'm legitimately listing for sale, and it's not spam. And so we go through kind of that portion of the process here. And the transaction submitted. I sign it. And it's complete. The listing's successful. And there you go. You can find Nifty Space over on OpenSea. And so going back to the notion of why do people buy NFTs, and why I think answering that in part goes to because it's easy for creators to create NFTs. And with that, I will hand the microphone back to John.
Great. Well, thanks, Sarah, for showing us how you set a mint an NFT for sale, listed for sale. And as Sarah mentioned, if you go to OpenSea, which is a platform where you buy NFTs, you'll find Sarah's NFT, and she set a minimum sale price of $100. I don't know if anyone's ever going to buy it, Sarah, at that price, but it is there for those of you who are interested. Okay, so how did NFTs become such a big thing? As Sarah mentioned, they've been around for a while with Cryptokitties, but they really didn't start hitting the public consciousness until late 2020. And so in October 2020, a Miami-based art collector spent $67,000 buying an NFT that was associated with a 10-second video clip by an artist named People, which at the time, very few people outside of the crypto community had heard of People. He was a kind of a underground graphic artist, but had a big following among people that were in the crypto community. So this art collector in Miami buys this 10-second video clip, which is embedded or associated with an NFT for $67,000. But then in February of last year, so just over a year ago, that collector sold the same NFT associated with the same artwork for $66.6 million. So October, it was $67,000. By February, it was $6.6 million in value. And so this started the art world and the collector community kind of buzzing about NFTs. And if we go to the next slide, March 11th of last year is when most of you in the audience may have first heard of NFTs, because that morning you woke up and you read the New York Times, and on the front page, it talked about this artist People, who wasn't really a household name, selling an NFT for $69.3 million. Here's an image of the work of art. It's actually a collection of 5,000 separate images, which People created a different image each day, and then he compiled them into this one kind of collage or mosaic. The bidding attracted 33 bidders. It was a 10-day auction. And in the final minutes of the auction, the price jumped to $20 million and then to $50 million, and then was sold to a Singapore-based cryptocurrency investor who goes by the pseudonym Metacoven. So suddenly NFTs hit the front page of newspapers and became a big buzz item and started generating a lot of interest among artists, among collectors, and among musicians and other creators of artistic works. Next slide. Just show you how amazing this is. This slide shows the 3 artworks that have sold by living artists that have sold at auction for the highest amount of money. So most of you are probably familiar with Jeff Koons' iconic rabbit, sold for $91.1 million at auction, all-time record holder. No living artist has ever sold a work of art at auction for higher than that price. The second image is David Hockney's iconic Portrait of an Artist pool with 2 figures. Probably a work that even if you're not an artist, you're familiar with. That has sold at auction for $90.3 million as second place. In third place is People, The first 5,000 days, $69.3 million. So Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg have not sold at auction a work at a higher price than what People's work sold at. And again, this by an artist who was not well known prior to March 11th of last year. Next slide. There are a lot of use cases for NFTs. And sorry, Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the use cases that are developing for NFTs.
Sure. Yeah. Just to kind of tack on to where a lot of these sales are happening, you know, it's these big names, $69 million for people, and some of the kind of really noteworthy transactions. We may read about those, but a lot of the transactions are actually happening on these NFT marketplaces. And so we've listed here some of the names of the various NFT marketplaces. I demonstrated creating an NFT and listing it for sale on one of these marketplaces, specifically OpenSea. And you can see my little NFT sitting there for sale. One of the interesting facets of this, because it's all based on blockchain technology, meaning it's an open ledger, it's auditable by kind of all of the nodes in the network. Who wants to go find the NFTs can go find them. You'll see that Rarible is both listed as an NFT marketplace, as well as one of the filters that you can select from within the OpenSea user interface there. And that's a feature of the fact that this is all built on blockchain technology, where you can go create an NFT on Rarible, but because it's published to the public blockchain network, OpenSea can also scrape information about that NFT and make it easily filterable from within their user interface. And so if you're on OpenSea and you want to buy an NFT that would, or browse NFTs that were originally published on Rarible, that's a filter that you can select there, and it'll show you those results. John? Oh, you're on mute.
Yep, sorry. So I mentioned we're going to walk through some use cases. We're going to go through this pretty quickly. And again, it's early days. NFTs really just became a thing a year and a month ago with the March 11th People's sale. But we're already seeing a lot of really interesting use cases in the arts community for NFTs. So one thing Sarah already mentioned in the art world, as many NAC members know, there's always been an issue about provenance and tracking the ownership history of a physical painting or a sculpture. Often there can be gaps in the record, and NFTs are really a great solution to this issue. So right now, as you know, pre-NFTs, tracking provenance meant registering, reselling, a lot of paperwork. It was all entirely paper driven. It made for a lengthy, expensive, and mistake-prone process. Now, often physical artworks, when they're sold, will have accompanying NFT that the purchaser of the physical artwork will also receive. And that NFT will follow the physical artwork, and you'll have a digital record on the public blockchain of the transfers of the NFT that's associated with the artwork. So this is really kind of a novel technical solution to a problem that has existed, going all the way back to the early days of the painting and sculpture. Next slide. Also, NFTs are interestingly reviving long forgotten artists, or at least, this artist wasn't familiar to me, Vladimir Baranov Rusine. But if you're an art historian or you're very interested in Russian Cubal futurism, the art movement, Vladimir was one of the founders of that movement, but his works largely do not sell for the high prices today, and he's a little bit forgotten. But his estate has been selling NFT versions of his artwork to get an interest in younger people and a new generation of art, people interested in artworks. And so as a result, his reputation has been rising in the art community thanks to his estate creating NFTs highlighting some of his artistic works. Next slide. Another interesting use case, but I caveat, this raises a lot of legal issues, but we see an interest in the art community and fractionalized interest in masterpieces or in famous artworks. So the 2018, the first piece of fine art ever to be tokenized with blockchain technology was an Andy Warhol painting. You see it in a recreation of it here, 14 small electric chairs, was valued at $5.6 million, and 31.5% interest in this work was sold off for 1.7 million. And the buyers obtained a token that was associated with their percentage interest in the Warhol work. And as we note in the slide, you need to be very careful if you're interested in going down this particular use case avenue, because there are a lot of, it looks a little bit like an equity transaction when you invest in a company. Here you're investing in a painting, and so there can be securities laws issues that we'll touch on generally later in this presentation. Next slide. Damien Hearst, the well-known contemporary artist, is doing a project right now where he created 10,000 unique hand-painted sheet paintings. And then for each of the 10,000, he created an NFT associated with that work. So for every work of art, there's an NFT version and a physical version. He then sold the NFTs for $2,000. And he said within a year, you needed to decide whether you wanted to keep the NFT or trade it in for the physical version. So people that paid the $2,000 for the token, I think the year hasn't run out yet, but of the 10,000 sold, only 550 NFTs to date have been exchanged for the physical version. Damien Hearst is going to burn all the physical versions that are not swapped for NFTs. And for the NFTs that are traded in for the physical versions, those NFTs will be destroyed. So just an interesting experiment taking place around the interaction between physical artworks and the NFT versions of those artworks. Next slide, please. Even the Picasso estate is getting into NFTs. So the two of Picasso's heirs tried to do an NFT offering based on one of Picasso's hand-painted ceramic works that's never been viewed publicly. The piece dates back to 1958. Christie's Sotheby's was going to be involved with auctioning off the NFTs. But there was a family dispute with the other Picasso heirs, weren't happy about this, so it's been put on hold. So it remains to be seen if that'll happen. The next use case, next slide. There's now all these art-focused NFT platforms. Sarah mentioned OpenSea, Nifty Gateway. Those are kind of all types of NFTs, but we're now seeing some platforms that are specific to fine art. One is called Live Art. Again, no endorsement, but just to highlight one of the better known platforms in the space. And what increasingly is happening is an artist contemporary artist will show a gallery show, and you can buy the painting, and the painting might come with the token, or you might be able to buy the token separately from the painting, so that buyer A may end up with the painting and buyer B with the token, but both are kind of offered for sale at the same time. And one thing I do want to mention, there's a lot of confusion about this. A lot of people ask us, well, why would anyone pay any money for the NFT? Like you can a lot like the People work that someone paid $69.3 million. You can see it. You saw it in my slides, right? You can see it on the internet. Why would you pay But when I was at college in my dorm, I had a print of Van Gogh Starry Starry Night. I paid $3 for it. No one would buy it for more than $3. In fact, no one would probably buy it for more than 50 cents, right? But if that was the original Starry Starry Night on my dormer wall, it would be worth millions and millions, right? There is something to be said about the original that, authenticated by the artist. And that's what NFTs allow artists to do with digital versions of their work, to say this digital version is authenticated by me and it's approved by me, whereas other versions you might find floating around on the internet have not been endorsed or approved by the artist, just like my poster in my dorm room in college. Next slide. So we talked about fine art use cases, but the entertainment and media industry generally is embraced NFTs. There's a lot of interesting things happening in the music space, around film and television, around sports, video games. So we don't have time to go into all these use cases, but maybe if people have questions and during the Q&A session, we're happy to answer them. Next slide, and we'll turn it back over to Sarah.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and before we even dive into the weeds of some of the securities law, some of the regulatory considerations, starting with securities laws, just to tack on to sort of the why is an NFT unique and what's interesting about it. One concept that exists in the blockchain universe is this concept of smart contracts. Now, I hate the phrase smart contract personally, because a smart contract, when being used in blockchain universe, is neither smart nor is it necessarily legally binding. So as a lawyer, I take issue with that name. But what a smart contract is it's an if this, then that program that will execute transactions on a blockchain network when certain conditions are met. And so, for example, if John and I make a bet on the weather with a pointer to say something like weather.com, I think it's going to be over 70 degrees. He thinks no way. We memorialize that into a smart contract that points, we both put in our $10 and the contract points to weather.com. And it's a yes, no outcome of whether or not the weather hits 70 degrees or not. And it will automatically pay out, at 12:01, just past midnight, based on whoever wins that bet. And the reason this is important is because it touches on why some of the legal and regulatory, it not only does it touch on why we can do that provenance tracking in the digital universe as a product matter, but touches on the regulatory considerations as well. So I won't spend a ton of time on it, but securities laws, money services and money transmitter laws and IP laws tend to be the biggest focus areas for legal questions that come up in the blockchain universe, and specifically with NFTs. So are NFTs securities under the federal securities laws? A lawyer's favorite answer, it depends, or maybe. So the infamous test for telling whether or not something is a security when it's not obviously a stock or something like that is called the Howie test. And it's worth spending just a minute understanding the background on the Howie test before talking about it in the context of NFTs. The Howie test was a Supreme Court case where there was an orange grove and an enterprising entrepreneur said, I will sell you a portion of this orange grove. And with the portion of the orange grove that you're buying, so you're buying a patch of land with some orange trees on it, I'm also selling you this part of the purchase is contingent on you also signing this contract where you agree that I will do the work to make sure that the orange grove actually grows oranges, find a place to sell the oranges, could generate a revenue, and you'll just get paid based on the fact that you own this orange grove and I'm maintaining it for you. And the Supreme Court ultimately said, that's an investment contract, and an investment contract is a security. And the elements that they drew out from that scenario and deciding that the sale of these Orange Grove and the sale of the Orange Grove with these contracts was an investment contract or a security, was that they looked at whether or not there's an investment of money into a common enterprise with a reasonable expectation of profits derived from the efforts of others. And so in the case of the Orange Grove, the ultimate decision was, hey, you're buying, it's being pitched as you're buying an Orange Grove, but what you're really buying is an Orange Grove with a management contract where someone else is going to do all the work, and all you have to do is sit back and expect a passive income based on some money that you put in up front. And ultimately, the Supreme Court said that is what an investment contract is under U.S. law. That's a security. And so in the context of NFTs, where we see this come up is there's a couple different areas. Some of it has to do with the notion of, well, what are you selling the NFT for? If you're selling the NFT for the idea that you'll raise some amount of money and it'll then build a project or a bigger ecosystem, or you're selling the NFT with this kind of notion of, hey, buy it now, but because we're going to create a whole series around it, we're pretty sure you're going to be able to sell it for more later. Then the kind of expectation of profit that you are building into your purchasers could end up triggering NFTs into being securities under US securities laws. The other reason it's interesting is because, and part of why I wanted to mention the concept of a smart contract is if there's an expectation of profits from kind of future actions that happen on chain, then that's another area where securities laws can be involved. So if you build into that smart contract the notion that, John buys my NFT today for $100, I could write into that smart contract a requirement that anytime John then sells, or whoever John sells to, and it gets sold 13 more times down the line, that 20% of any of those sales has to come back to me as the original creator. And in doing that, I may be incentivizing John to think of my NFT as an investment contract, as a, well, I'm going to buy it, I'm going to sell it. And then every time it sells after that, there's some amount that's going to come back to me. And so the marketing around how you're selling NFTs is very important to the securities law analysis. If we go to the next slide, there's an element here of don't take my word for it. Really, blockchain tokens in general are on the SEC's radar. The SEC regulates securities, and NFTs and blockchain tokens generally are on their radar because a few years ago there was a kind of huge push. It was called the Ico Stage, if you're familiar with initial coin offerings. And initial coin offerings really put blockchain tokens on the radar of the SEC because they looked an awful lot like stock offerings, where they were being sold with the expectation that you'll be able to sell them later, and the team that is selling you these tokens will build an ecosystem, and it raised all of the alarm bells at the SEC of like, hey, all of this looks like this very well might be a security, and as a result, there's kind of from a regulatory perspective, the flags go up. This might be a security as sort of a default reaction by the SEC. And so you might think like it's an NFT. It's just a linked to a piece of art. Well, you have to think through these issues because a lot of the blockchain tokens that have existed to date have been viewed by the SEC as securities. And so going through that Howie test analysis is important when thinking about any kind of NFT. Moving on to federal money services business laws. The federal money services regulators, if we can go to the next slide, federal money services regulators were actually the very first to ever opine on the regulatory status of any blockchain token. At the time, it was really just Bitcoin. It was in 2013, and they came out with guidance saying, hey, if you're issuing a token that substitutes for currency, you need to follow all of the same rules that you would if it was any other kind of money or currency, and be regulated accordingly. And the regulatory goals there are around anti-money laundering requirements, prohibiting illicit activity. A lot of this doesn't typically impact NFTs, and certainly not the NFTs that are focused on artwork, except that more recently, FinCEN, again, the regulator that regulates all of this, has come out and said that fine art is an area of a primary area of money laundering concern. And so when thinking about pieces of art that associated with NFTs selling for $69 million, it's fair to assume that FinCEN is including NFTs when thinking about art as a matter of money laundering concern. And then on the next slide, similar to the federal money services laws around, is this token actually a substitute for currency? There are a lot of state money transmitter laws as well. They are primarily focused on consumer protection. So things like, are fees being disclosed to you? Do you know, are you getting a receipt? Are there hidden fees that you don't know about? These are the regulators actually that regulate companies like PayPal and Venmo, and in turn now regulate a number of the cryptocurrency exchanges. And again, this is less likely to come up in NFTs that are art specific, but we see it come up where there are NFTs for in-game items where it's a gold token to be used, and it's actually, there are 1 million NFTs associated with a little gold token that can then be used and traded in a game. And at that point, it starts to look more fungible, notwithstanding the fact that you might be using NFT technology for it. And so I call it semi-fungible tokens or iterations of NFTs. And in that case, you still need to kind of go through the analysis of whether or not money transmitter laws are being triggered. John, do you want to talk about IP?
Yeah, so let's do the next slide. I know we're want to save time for questions, so I'm going to go through the remaining slides pretty quickly. But so Sarah talked about the regulatory issues. There's also intellectual property law considerations. Just so you know, NFTs, like all technologies, can be used for good or for evil. And there are fraudsters, there's pirates, there's people taking other people's artwork without their permission and selling it as an NFT, tricking consumers into thinking it is a piece that's approved. But so that's out there. But I think the reason why NFTs have proven so popular with artists and creators is it really does represent a way to deal with the fact that digital copies of their works could be just hundreds of millions of them floating around the internet and without an ability to stop it. Well, you're never going to be able to stop that, but maybe you can say this copy is the one that I've approved. This copy is the one that I've authenticated, and create value. So let's go to the next slide. Regarding the fraudsters, there has been a fake Banksy NFT that someone paid $300,000 in Ether for before realizing it seems kind of un-Banksy, like, frankly, to be selling NFTs. But anyways, buyer beware. You need to do your due diligence, and if it seems too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. Next slide. But as I mentioned, the positive benefits to creators are really compelling, and I think ultimately outweigh the infringement concerns. As I mentioned, it's an anecdote to the unlimited, digital copies, where you can actually create a one-of-a-kind, unique digital copy of your work of art or music or photograph or painting, which is something that didn't exist before blockchain and NFT technology allowed us to do this. Next slide. So this kind of slide illustrates what Sarah has mentioned. This is one of the things most exciting to artists. Some of you may remember the California Resale Royalty Act, where artworks sold in California might generate even downstream sales, a royalty for the artist, but the law was hard to enforce. It was of dubious constitutionality. But a smart contract allows the original artist to capture some of the value of the resale market. for the artwork. So here, day one, Ringo mints an NFT. Day two, Ringo sells the NFT to George for $100. Day three, George sells the NFT to Paul for $1,000. But look what happens. $800 of the $1,000 sale price goes back to George, the seller, but $200, 20%, goes back to Ringo, the original artist who minted the NFT. So right now with traditional artworks, the artist gets the value of the initial sale subject to gallery fees and so forth, but doesn't capture any value from downstream sales. And NFTs change that and make it possible for the artist to capture the upside as the work increases in value. But as we note here, the Howie test, as Sarah mentioned, and securities laws are a real issue when you have these downstream revenues, revenue royalties going back to the original creator. Next slide. So here we're just going to, I'm not going to go through this slide, but I present it to you. There's a lot of really interesting, complex IP issues raised. And, it is important, for example, music. You may have recorded a song, but you may not own the underlying composition. So, you need to make sure if you're going to sell an artwork that you've cleared all the rights. And to the extent there's third-party creative works embedded in your artwork, you need to make sure that you've done everything you need to do to ensure that you have the authority to be able to sell that artwork as an NFT. Next slide. So and then we're going to end here, turn it over to questions, but we just want to mention we've only touched the surface on the legal issues. So there's there's tax issues, contract law issues, except again, that's for a whole separate day-long presentation, legal conference, so we're not going to bore you with that, but just to let you know that this is an area where you do want to consult with legal counsel if you're going to do an NFT initiative. So Charles, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of all of our guests, on behalf of the National Arts Club, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, John, for your expertise, valuable information, and all of your insight. You said it right there, John. We could easily fill another hour, or this could be the first in a 7-part series
Yeah.
about this market and what's going on. We've had some wonderful questions. I'm sorry to our guests if we don't get to each one. You two touched on this a little bit. What can the owner of an artwork that has an NFT attached to it, what can they do with it? Someone asked if they may print it into a printed work, for instance, and then someone else asked if they could use the NFT artwork that they own and create a derivative of it.
Okay. Wow, Charles, this is a great question and one we're dealing with every week in our practice. And many of your members may be familiar with Bored Apes, which is all the rage. And I think there's hundreds of thousands of them, and each one is unique, although some of them just minor variations. One might have a baseball cap, but the other has, a top hat. But the bottom line is it's important before you buy an NFT to determine what are you buying. As Sarah mentioned, there are some NFTs where you buy a kind of ownership of the artwork, but that's relatively unusual. Usually you own the digital token, but the value of that token is the artwork that it's associated with, by the way, which is often stored in the cloud, not on the token itself. And so there's often a license. It'll usually be in the terms of use of the platform, the auction platform that sold it to you, or it might be a link embedded in the token that sets out the terms of use. But often the licenses prohibit commercial use and prohibit creating a derivative work. Although Bored Apes have become very popular because it purports to allow for commercial use. So for example, their terms of use specifically say you could take your Bored Ape image and put it on a t-shirt. use it as an avatar on your social media site and do other things with it. So although when you actually read the terms, even as a lawyer, Sarah and I often find them confusing. So, you do want to kind of make sure, but I think there is a trend towards allowing greater use and to create it. So if you buy the image, maybe you'll have a right to put it on a coffee mug or on a t-shirt. Of course, if you're an artist, you might be horrified by this, right? You might not want that. And when you buy a Warhol painting, you don't have a right to create a t-shirt of it. You just have the right, let's use Damien Hearst or David Hockney, works that are still protected by copyright. You only get a right to display it in your house. If you wanted to display it publicly, you'd have to go back to the owner of the copyright, usually the estate or the artist, and get permission to do that. Is there anything to add? Or maybe we can jump to the next question.
No, I think you covered that.
Sarah, I had a question. I think that this was inspired when you were, and it was wonderful the way that you narrated creating and minting an NFT. And you mentioned how a strong password is critical to all of this. Someone was asking about what are the special hacking or security issues that I suppose whether it be an artist or a collector have to consider with this, as you have each said, very new technology.
Yeah, I think there are all sorts of possible attack vectors, and everything from someone gaining control of the underlying wallet. So I went through the process there of creating a wallet. I think that's one of the most common attack vectors is someone gains access, either copies the password or otherwise, I've seen all sorts of sophisticated hacks involving social engineering and taking over, porting SIMs on cell phones and everything. It's ripe for all sorts of kind of fraud and hacking. But I think the biggest vector is probably at that account level of someone who shouldn't have access to your account gaining access. And the reason it's so it's such an issue is that, if you get locked out of your bank account or even your email address, generally speaking, you can go show up at the bank and you can say, hey, stop whatever's going on, reverse any transactions. This wasn't authorized. Here's my ID. I'm me. This is my account. This was all fraudulent activity. In the case where a blockchain is being used, if someone gains access to my wallet and they send my $69 million NFT or whatever other tokens that I have in my wallet, they send them off to some other wallet, that transaction is irreversible. The network, once it validates that all of the inputs are appropriate that have been put into the sending of that transaction, there's no way to get that back. And so it really is at the kind of wallet account compromise level that the biggest risks of hacking exist.
Yeah, we tell clients that buy NFTs, you really want to make sure you have a secure place to keep it, because it's really whoever possesses the token possesses the artwork that's associated with it. And so if someone hacks your wallet, it's, as Sarah mentioned, you can't reverse that. So you pay $69.3 million for a work of art, someone hacks your wallet, sells it for $80 million, and there's nothing you can do. The other thing I would note too, you've all heard the stories of the poor person that bought 100 Bitcoin or 1,000 Bitcoin 10 years ago, but their mom threw out their computer and they're digging through landfills trying to find it. And so if you forget your password, you have the same issue with that token and the artwork associated just remains in limbo. So it really is important to use a good password protection system and to be careful.
It's amazing. It's just kind of an old-fashioned adage there to use a password that no one can recognize, not your firstborn and your dog and the year of your birth, but something something a
There's
little
no
more complex.
circumstances use password as your password.
Right, right. Someone was asking about when you set up your crypto wallet, and I've seen this too. Why would someone use an alias as opposed to their real name? And the person, our guest, also asked, is your NFT collection visible on your wallet? I mean, what are the rationales, I guess, advantages or disadvantages of using an alias and your real name?
Yeah, I think I can speak to that. And John, you probably have ideas too. But I think at the highest level, the biggest advantage is to sort of be able to show off, this is my NFT collection. There's a company out there called Gallery where you can go and you can have an account with Gallery, and Gallery will let you set up different galleries of, here's the room of your historic Cryptokitties and here are your newer NFTs, and you can kind of set up different rooms, and it's a way to sort of show off, this is my artwork. And so that's the upside to using your real identity, is if that's something that's appealing to you, of letting people know, hey, look at these cool collectibles I have. You've got to have a way to tie that to your identity. I think the flip side is if you are concerned about social engineering or hacking and kind of tagging on to that concept, then there's an advantage to maybe no one knowing who you even are, that or who is behind the wallet that holds a particular NFT, because then you are less susceptible to the types of social engineering or just physical hacking that could occur if they don't actually know who to tie the ownership of a particular token or wallet address to.
Great. And actually, Charles, if you don't mind, I did notice one question I'd like to clarify. There was a question about, we showed a screenshot of OpenSea with Sarah's token, and there were two other tokens. Those are not Sarah's. They're one featuring Elon Musk and one featuring the character from Up. Just so you know, no copyrights were infringed in Sarah's creation of her token. But there are, as the questioner points out, other uses, and those folks have ID names similar to Sarah's, which is why they showed up in a search. So
Noted.
As copyright lawyers, we really want to set the record clear on that.
No, I get it. I think we have time for two more questions, Sarah and John. My background is as an appraiser. So I would conduct an appraisal of an estate or a work of art for an insurance purposes, for instance, and that's submitted to the insurance company. What about insurance? Say, for instance, as you've both described, the nightmare if someone loses their crypto wallet or cannot access their NFTs. Have insurance companies caught up to this market?
John, I'm not sure what you're seeing. What I can opine on is on the more financial services side of blockchain use cases. So not necessarily NFT specifically. There are now a lot of regulated financial institutions that are holding other kinds of crypto tokens, Bitcoin, Ether, and all sorts of other things. And in connection with becoming a regulated financial institution, usually having some kind of insurance on the security of what you're providing, the technological and practical and business continuity pieces are things that are looked at. And so I think insurance companies are starting to become more sophisticated as there are more and more companies that are dealing with blockchain-based assets. We're starting to see more and more insurers get comfortable. That said, I don't know that I've seen any insurance companies specifically focused on NFTs.
Yeah, that's consistent. There's now cybersecurity policies that may cover against cybersecurity breaches, but they tend to be very expensive. They're not really aimed at the consumer market. But Sarah does raise a good point. There's two types of wallets. There's one where you control it, and only you have the access to the the access credentials. But Sarah, right, there's also wallets where a custodian, a financial institution might hold it for you. Where, Sarah, this is more your area of expertise, but you might have more protection, right? If something terrible were to happen, at least you have a big financial institution standing behind it. So
I think this will be our final question, and it is a delightful question. Do either of you collect NFT artwork, or also what kind of artwork do each of you collect, if you don't mind sharing?
Sarah, do you want to go first, or?
Sure, I'll go first. I definitely have some NFTs. I don't mind sharing that the screenshot of Cryptokitties when I was showing the Cryptokitties on the deck are from my personal collection of Cryptokitties. In terms of other artwork, I think the majority of the NFTs that I've collected because of either the people involved or the kind of ethos behind the project. And so I have a crypto coven, there's Astro Girls, Seems Unreal. And so most of them I've selected based on sort of interesting components to the team that is launching them, as opposed to the artwork itself. In kind of my real world, I'm more of a fan of probably more of like landscapes and geometric patterns. So if you were to see my house, there's a lot of lines and diagonals and artwork that's maybe less concrete than, you know, a crypto coven face or something like that we see in the NFT world.
Delightful.
Well,
John?
just that, yeah, my one thing, there's a lot of like low cost. Not everything is the 69.3 million. So we do work for a company called Sweet, that you download their app, you get a free NFT just when you open up your app, and it's kind of fun and everything's low cost. And so that, you know, has been kind of, you know, I'd like just trying out things and seeing the different products that are out there, but I haven't yet been comfortable opening up my wallet and spending huge amounts of money on the the NFT space.
Right. Well, Sarah, John, again, on behalf of our guests, on behalf of the National Arts Club, thank you for your time and expertise at this wonderful program.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you for the NAC crew that made this seamless for us. So we really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you. We are grateful. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone, our guests have been John Delaney and Sarah Stillman from Perkins Coie LLP. And we thank them again for their expertise, time, and insight. And I would like to thank you for supporting the arts and for supporting the National Arts Club and joining this program. If you'd like to find out about more events and programs like this that are hosted by the National Arts Club, please visit nationalartsclub.org. So again, we thank our guests and we thank each of you who joined us. Our time is up. We thank you for yours, and good night.